Thank you so much. I guess I start. Thank you so much for Richard and Jesper and all the wonderful sponsors. I visited yesterday Berg School, which is an incredible school. I want to go back to school, actually. And the hotel that I'm staying is really nice in the blogger suite. And thank you so much for Tina back in New York, who recommended me for this talk. I've been now for 24 hours, and thank you, 24 hours in Stockholm, and it's really amazing. And yesterday I had sort of this experience where now maybe I understand why Americans always confuse Switzerland with Sweden. I just bought like a deodorant in a drugstore, and they gave me this really neat paper bag that was completely designed. There was foil stamp and lettering on there. So I was, wow, I can't wait to get immersed in all of the graphic design that's around here, which is my passion. But to this talk today, I want to tell you a little bit about how I was able to overcome not being able to communicate verbally through the language of graphic design. And it all started when I was a little kid, the only girl with 3 brothers. They never listened to me, and I felt unable to communicate with them. After high school, I went to London to study media studies, and I just added another layer of complexity, which was English. I was terrible at, and I, again, couldn't speak, I couldn't communicate. Nobody understood me, and it was very frustrating. And at that time, I had the opportunity to go to New York for an internship at an advertising agency, which eventually led me to the field of graphic design. But I loved New York, and when I arrived there, people are from all over the world, and I felt like I was coming home. Nobody really spoke English that well, or everybody speaks differently, everybody has an accent, and they don't care if you don't speak it properly, or at least they made me feel that way. So they were really welcoming in a probably superficial way, we say, for Americans, but it felt good, and it gave me confidence as a not confident speaker or person. So I decided to pack up everything and move to New York for good and enroll in a program at School of Visual Arts to study graphic design. And that's where I found my way of communicating. I learned the tools to communicate without language. And I took a class with Christoph Niemann, who's a German illustrator. And I'm going to show you a really basic exercise he did with us. We had to illustrate a visual cliche, and he said, embrace that visual cliche and then show the opposite. And I thought that was so simple and so powerful, and I didn't need any words to explain this. And so I'm trying to always have this in the back of my mind, to explain things visually without explaining them. So after school, I started my professional career at Doyle Partners, which is a small design agency in New York. I worked on smaller projects like book covers. And I found it fascinating that you can, in this small little rectangle, you can visually summarize these 300 pages so people immediately know what it's about. My first huge project was with Paula Scher when I worked at Pentagram. I was given the assignment to design a book for Jon Stewart. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with him. He's a comedian in the States who has The Daily Show, which is sort of a news program, which is very funny. So it was a very interesting path to actually see the comedians try to write and tell a joke and see where design was actually communicating, or in this case, illustrating it better than they were trying to convey. And I realized, on the one hand, graphic designers can communicate things that he or she may not understand, although that was quite embarrassing on my part. But I also realized that there's much more beyond language, and it's politics, it's cultural references, and especially humor. But nevertheless, the language of design helped me to disguise this handicap that I had no clue what those jokes were about. Here are a few threads. They actually had a last chapter in that book, which was called The Rest of the World. And when I was preparing for this talk and I saw this thread, I thought that was pretty funny, actually. So from New York, I wanted to expand to a larger universe, and I decided to take a job with advertising, and primarily in the interactive field, for obvious reasons, because I was only working primarily in print at Pentagram, and for me and to everyone else in this day, interactive is how we communicate. So I wanted to get on it in that way. So I moved to Colorado to work at an advertising agency called Crispin, Porter & Boguski, where I was placed in the interactive department. So here I am in Colorado, in the middle of America, feeling like a fish out of water again. And I got exposed to a whole new language, which was interactive. It was like moving to another country and learning a new set of vocabulary. It was completely new to me. And more than anything, I was working with this iconic brand, Burger King, selling hamburgers. So there I got a taste to learn how to communicate with a very large audience and sell a product. It was a lot of fun. It was very intense, and I learned a lot in these 365 days, because that's how much I lasted. And then I wanted something more, and luckily MoMA was looking for a creative director, so I moved back to New York. So in some way, I felt like I was coming home again, because art is universal. It transcends cultures, economy, and age, and especially it transcends language. 60% of our visitors are international. And a museum can facilitate communication through, let's say, the 8 most spoken languages, which may look very neat here, where all the floor plans are in different languages displayed. But it is quite frankly a mess to do so all the time. So I constantly challenge myself and the team to try to communicate with as few words as possible and actually embrace iconography, so the other languages other than those top 8, or I think in this case it's 7, are also understanding where to go. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to now focus only on MoMA and the work that we do, a little bit of history, the tools that we're using, the team that's behind all of that work, and a few case studies. In order to give a little bit more context to my presentation, MoMA already has a rich graphic design history. It was it was founded in 1929, and its visual identity had quite a few looks in its first 30 years. Until the mid-60s, when institutions realized that there's real value in continuity in how you present yourself, the museum committed to Franklin Gothic in its identity and introduced this typographic logo designed by Chairman Ivan Geismar. The collateral of the museum was thriving, embracing the Franklin Gothic typeface. MoMA maintained a fairly successful typographic treatment by sticking to Franklin Gothic in their identity. And then in 2002, the architect Taniguchi was commissioned for the new building. The museum was separated in these disparate components, and the museum slowly started to use the acronym MoMA in departments like marketing, retail, film, or the website. The actual galleries moved to Queens, which is a neighborhood in New York, and they needed a transitional logo, so they hired Base Design, who came up with MoMA QNS. And then in 2004, MoMA was ready to move back to 53rd Street, and everybody thought, oh, well, so now this is the perfect timing to do a rebranding. And Bruce Mao, who was commissioned to do the building signage, advised actually not to change the identity, but fully embrace MoMA, the acronym, which I thought was probably a really, really smart move in branding. Ed Puz, the former design director at that time, commissioned Matthew Carter, who's a typeface designer, to to refine the digital typeface based on the original Foundry type and create MoMA's own typeface called MoMA Gothic. The difference between those two typefaces is very subtle, as stated in numerous articles, especially for non-designers, but I think I can feel it. It just looks a little bit chunkier and better. So in 2004, the museum fully committed to a unique, universally identifiable symbol. Here is Bruce Miles signage outside of the building, and throughout the museum is signage. So that went well for quite some time, but people get bored, especially designers get bored. And with so many beautiful typefaces out there, it's tempting to use them, and you can use them, you can cheat a little bit here and there and use them in a flyer or an ad, but after a while it sums up and it gets messy, which I think happened. So when I arrived in 2008, I was disappointed by the visual inconsistency of the logo, and there was no consistency of a secondary typeface. The amount of sub-brands that each department had were quite daunting. There was no consistent visual communication across the institution. So I looked at the brand's elements and structure that the museum already had, and MoMA's palette itself is quite simple and easy to understand. It has a really great logo, it has amazing artwork, and it has a solid typeface. So we hired Paula Scher at Pentagram, who was at that time on the marketing advisory committee, and we asked her to develop an advertising template that eventually then was used in all of MoMA's visual communications, such as brochures and signs. The template itself is super simple. It shows the MoMA logo always in black, so it doesn't compete with the artwork. And it's always on the edge of the paper and between the artwork and the edge of the paper. And the artwork itself is the hero of the page. It encourages cropping to give the layout even more tension, which is more challenging, actually, with working with estates and artists that don't want to be cropped. And it prominently displays in a white field the title and the date, so you don't have to look for it. Because I worked with Paula before, it was quite easy for me and my team to actually take this and now adapt it to all of the different other platforms and create sort of some style guides with it. We had lots of fun with the template because it's really flexible. And through the repetition of the look, it makes MoMA ad instantly recognizable, regardless of its exhibition. And that's really important in New York, because there are other cultural institutions who may actually have a Matisse or a Cartier-Bresson exhibit. So people need to know immediately it's at MoMA, and then they see what's there. We take liberty to splice up the logo and to communicate more than one single show. The opportunities are endless. There are a million touch points, and our job is to keep our branding consistent across all of the platforms. So I think it's reasonable to say that we now fully embraced the typeface everywhere again, like how it was used in the 60s. But sticking to one typeface day in and day out is really challenging, especially for young designers who want to try out new things. Obviously, all of the work that I'm showing here from MoMA is being designed by this incredible team. We have 6 full-time designers, 1 freelancer, always an amazing intern, and a copywriter and 3 production managers. And working in an in-house design firm is different than working in an agency, because you have to embrace your one and only client, which doesn't go away. And you become part of a bigger picture, and most importantly, you have to collaborate with other departments and with your peers and with artists. And it's not about you. You have to eliminate your ego. It's about MoMA, what's right for MoMA. So that sometimes can be challenging for people that come from the outside. We have around 900 projects a year, but mostly everything is driven by an exhibition, of which we have approximately 40. And instead of dividing the work into an assembly line production, I do the opposite. Each exhibition is assigned to 1 or 2 designers based on the size of the show, and then they get coupled with a copywriter. The designer is responsible for every single touch point of the exhibition, whether it's a small online banner or a 20-foot title wall. This way the designer gets immersed in the content of the exhibition from beginning to end by knowing everything about it. From a workflow perspective, this may not be the most efficient way to work because some people are really not good in strategic thinking for an advertising campaign, or they're not good in three-dimensional design. But that keeps them fresh and keeps them learning. And we're all working sort of as a team, so someone can just jump in and help. And most importantly, it doesn't alienate anyone from the final product. And the designer is involved in the whole process for the entire life cycle of an exhibition, rather than being bored of just doing the same thing all the time. Based on the massive workloads, we are constantly trying to save time by creating these smart templates that allow us to have more time and energy on bigger projects. So instead of creating a new identity for every single exhibition, we decided to split them up in special exhibitions and rotation galleries. We have 28 smaller exhibitions which are drawn entirely from the collection. So we said you can only use one typeface, and that immediately eliminated 28 conversations with the curators about which typeface we should be using. But it doesn't eliminate our designers' creativity. Instead, actually, it enhances their creativity by really focusing on the messaging. The end result strengthens the look and our brand, and it makes it consistent, and we can really experiment with the production. Here we actually used a lenticular lens as the title. And the nice side effect is that everything really fits well together, even if the shows are totally different. And we eased the fear from the curators who were really afraid of losing their individuality, and I think they still look completely different. A few years ago, we had an exhibition that kind of fell in both camps. It was very special, but it was also a collection exhibition. It was drawn entirely from the collection of our abstract expressionist art, and it occupied one entire floor as well as two other galleries in different locations. The artwork itself was incredibly powerful and had superstars like Rothko, Jackson Pollock, and de Kooning. And August Hefner, who was the design lead on this exhibition, he looked at jazz covers in the 50s, which most of the artists were listening to at this time. And he developed a mini style guide, which was necessary because the exhibition was divided into these 3 different locations within the museum, each having actually a different title. And we didn't want to contradict our newfound rule of using MoMA Gothic for all collection shows, but we also wanted to treat this a little bit more special. So we chose still Franklin Gothic, but the extra compressed version as seen on those record covers. And a lot of art historians refer to this movement as ABEX, which we really liked. But then, because abstract expressionist is sort of a mouthful, but then we have to remind ourselves that 99% of those people that come to the museum have no idea about art, or, I mean, ABEX, about this term. They don't even maybe know who de Kooning is. So I think he cleverly still included it with color, but and it came out quite nice. Here are the 3 entrances to each gallery. So when it came to advertising the show, we did lots of research about who are these artists and what did they have to say, and we discovered that they were very outspoken. Their statements were just as powerful as their paintings. So we used all of these quotes in advertising, and we booked consecutive pages in magazines and started with the quote and then revealed the painting afterwards and plastered those quotes all around the city. And because of all of the artists lived and worked in Manhattan, together with education, we created this printed brochure with a walking tour where visitors can now trace back and see where those artists hung out and where they worked. And on our website, you can see archival images from that time, as well as listen to audio clips from the curator. And we also designed our first iPad app, which aggregated all of the content of the research that we did throughout the exhibition. And this was a true collaboration with curatorial and digital media and education. And it's a very rich app where you can watch videos and see the techniques and tools that those artists were using. The 12 special exhibitions, as I said, get special treatment, and because the designers are so worn out from always using the same typeface, they actually go to the other extreme of developing their own typefaces. So we create these little mini brands and play with it. Sometimes the artist gets involved himself. When we had a couple of years ago this exhibition for Tim Burton, it was easy to get inspired by him. His visuals are so rich, and he draws a lot of spirals and has a lot of handwriting. So that was an easy part. But the really, really hard part was when we said, like, we have to do a 30-second commercial, and that's when I completely froze. I've never done a commercial before, and here's this one of the best filmmakers in the world, and anything you do is going to be crap. And that's actually said across the board. I mean, we will never ever be as good as any of these artists, and we shouldn't, and we should actually never even try to compete with them. So in this case, we were in these meetings with Tim Burton, and I saw him always sketching in a sketchbook while everybody was talking, and I peeked out, and there were these creatures and things that, like the way how his work looks. And so I took all my courage together, and I printed out the MoMA logo on a piece of paper, and I said, well, why don't you start sketching on this paper, and you'll transform the MoMA logo and maybe Burtonify it. And he was saying, like, yes, of course. So totally unexpected. And he was so excited. A couple of months later, he emailed his first sketches of the storyboards, and then he put us in touch with his contacts, who made actual maquettes and then filmed this stop motion. And here it is. Yeah, so that was, yeah, when we saw that, like, wow, it's crazy. And it actually ended up on the hallway in the museum as well. So, sorry, I wanted to skip that project. Sorry. So coming to my last case study, MoMA's greatest assets, most fluid assets, are the visitors and the artists. And so I'm constantly wondering, what is their relationship when they come together in our building? And I truly believe in a quote by Marcel Duchamp, who once said that without the viewer, the artwork would not be complete. So we had to create an evergreen campaign that was independent of exhibitions that we could run throughout the year when we have slow periods. And we were sitting around the production table brainstorming with the team, and we were asking ourselves, like, who are those people? What do they like, and what inspires them? And we talked about our own experiences when we visit places and the stories we like to tell people back home, and how each visit will always be different from someone else's. And also that word of mouth will always be way more powerful than any kind of ad that we could create. So, so one of our designers, Brigitte, she was saying, well, wouldn't it be great if they would say, like, well, I went to MoMA and this happened to me. And we realized, oh, maybe we can use this. Like, I went to MoMA and fill in the blank. And we started Googling the sentence, and we already noticed that people used it in blog entries of telling their story about their visit at MoMA. So we thought, okay, let's do this. Let's do a campaign around this. And we immediately dreamed up these gigantic flat screens and LED screens in the lobby where people could like finish the sentence. And then the estimates kept rolling in, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we didn't even know if the idea would work. So we sort of scrapped this and let's revert to the basic tools of communication, which is a pencil and a piece of paper. There were no buttons to push, no technology to alienate any of our audience, whether young or old. A pencil and a paper everybody is familiar with. So we tried an experiment one evening in the lobby to see how it works. And people were really excited. They wanted to share their experience. And there were some examples. For example, like I went to MoMA and I was inspired to create. I went to MoMA and I understood why there is no life without art. And it was really eye-opening to see these very, very unexpected comments of people being so excited. There were just a few negative comments, but we were able to turn around these negative comments. There was one example, it was like the woman was confused about the entry and the exit of the exhibition, and immediately we could create signage and go downstairs and install them. So it became sort of this listening tool to our visitors. So then we used these cards in advertising and outdoor billboards, and we could use them contextually because some of them, for example, spoke about love, so we could place them in the vow section in the newspaper or in kids magazines that spoke about kids or had kids drawings. And simultaneously, while we collected them, we scanned them in and uploaded them on a website, moma.org/iwent, and that became a huge workload. Like every day, it was like 1,000 cards, and so we hired this agency called Poke in New York to develop a scanning station in the lobby, which scans each visitor's card and uploads them to this website, and then simultaneously actually projects them onto the lobby wall. So I think by now we already have like 22,000 cards. And we learned that sharing creativity and expression are extremely important with our visitors. Museums have changed. They're not anymore this one-way dialogue. It goes now both ways. And I think a museum should be fully participatory. It should be fully transparent, in constant flux. It should be an alive place where communication happens. So I'm still trying to figure out my way of communicating through different techniques, and maybe one day I will explore the words. So this is so far what I have. Thank you so much for listening.